So you've gone through, you've found the death records. They confirmed that they were in Germany. You may have found an obituary that gives you some more information, but what other records can you find? Now, I'm assuming in my case, my ancestors, my German ancestors, all immigrated between the 1840s and the 1880s in that mid 1800s timeframe. So a lot of their records are pretty easy to find and fairly complete. Now, if your ancestors came in the 1700s, in some of those early, the Palatine migrations and some of those early migrations, you might have a little bit more difficult time finding them, but there are still some records, and we'll get to some of those records a little bit later. With the US Census beginning in 1850, the census includes the place of birth for the individual. So that's going to be very helpful. Now, before 1850, some of the censuses have little tick marks that indicate if a person was of foreign birth or was a US citizen. And so you need to look at those tick marks and determine if they were, immigrants or if they were born in the US based on the presence of those tick marks. Starting the 1900 US Census, the census includes the year of immigration or naturalization, as well as the parents' birthplaces. So in many cases, you're going to use those years of immigration or naturalization or the status of naturalization to give you a hint. Don't totally rely on it. It may say, they immigrated in 1865, and you're going through, and the next census says 1863. And you finally get into the naturalization papers, and it's 1862. Well, just rely on those for a range of dates that are possible immigration or naturalization dates, and look on either side of those for possible records if you can't find anything quickly. So here's an example of the 1870 census from my great-great-grandmother, Teresa Wise. And you can see here she was 27 years old in 1870, according to the census. And you can see that her birth location is Hanover. So remember, one of the things you have to remember about the country of Germany is that Germany as a country was not established until in the early 1870s. Before that, it was just groupings of kingdoms and duchies and other free states and so on. So you'll need to get an idea of where those were. Hanover, the boundaries fluctuated fairly fluidly. So you're going to have to go back through and look at historic boundaries for Germany to figure out where Hanover may have been at the time when she was born. You also see that columns 11 and 12 are the father and the mother of foreign birth, and they've got the little tick marks there. Looking at the 1900 census, you can see she's listed as Tracy in this census. Right above that is August Wise. That was my great-great-grandfather. And you can see January 1840 was her birth date in this record. Now, that doesn't quite match up with what we had in the obituary. It said January 1839. So the census is off by a year in the birth year for this record. But you can also see here, it says she was born in Germany. Her parents were born in Germany. And then it has 1856 as the immigration year, and that she had been in the country. You have to look at that number pretty closely. It says 50, so it's not quite the right number, but it's approximately the right number. So another set of records that you can easily get access to for many of these German immigrants are the naturalization and immigration records. And the naturalization papers indicate the date, potentially the port of entry, and the name of the ship. So this is going to give you some great information to move that next step and look at the ship's passenger lists. And the ship's passenger lists may provide more details on the last residents or relatives that are still living in Germany. You can look up more information about German immigration and emigration records through the Family History Guide. It's one of the projects under the Germany heading. And you'll see some resources that are there that'll help you gather more information on this. But I want to show you, this is an example of one of the naturalization papers. And so when you look at naturalization records, there's several types. There's the Declaration of Aliens or Declaration of Intention. There are reapplication papers, there are second papers, and there are naturalization records. So this one here is for Joseph Augenstein. And the Augensteins are on my wife's German line. And if you read through this, this says he was a native of Germany. He's about 33 years old, bearing allegiance to the Emperor of Germany. And he emigrated from Bremen on the 20th of March, 1887, and arrived in New York on the 29th of March, 1887. So according to this record, it took him 9 days to go across the Atlantic Ocean. So it looks like that was a fairly quick trip for him. I've got another person that I was doing research on. It was over 70 days to get across the Atlantic when she immigrated to the United States. We've got the port of departure being Bremen. We've got the date when he departed. And then we've got the port of arrival being New York in 1887. And so the thing to think about here is what was the processing facility in New York in 1887? And a lot of people that haven't really started their research would say Ellis Island is how you came into New York. But Ellis Island wasn't open until the 1890s, early 1890s. So in 1887, we're looking at Castle Garden. So you want to make sure that you're in the right port of entry as you look for the information. Now, here's an example of a really useful ship's passenger list. And this is for Emil Augenstein. If you read through this, you can see that he was 19 years old. He was a mechanic from Germany. And then it says last permanent residence, and the country Germany and the city Ellmendingen, Baden. And then it says the name and complete address of nearest relative or friend currently residing in that country. And then it lists his father as Hermann Augenstein, 113 Ellmendingen, Forsheim. So really great information in this ship's record. And this ship's record from 1926. Now, what I want to point out is, in this case here, he's coming from Germany. He's arriving in New York, and he is intending to settle in Brooklyn, according to this record. If you notice, though, the person right underneath him is Martha Sander, and she's a cook from Germany. But then it says last residence, USA, Los Angeles. And then it says her sister is Frau Pfeiffer from Oberton, Landeshut, Germany. Notice this individual here. What she had done was she settled in Los Angeles and then went back to New York and went to Germany, visited family probably, and then departed from Bremen in Germany and came back to New York. And so because of that fact that she went back to Germany and then came back to the United States, we now know her sister that's still in Germany, and we know the town that they lived in. Okay. The Saunders are not one of my wife's relatives or anything like that. It just so happens that this is just the next record on this page. But, you may want to look beyond just the entry into the United States, the first entry into the US for your immigrant ancestors. They may have gone back and forth several times. I've got another ship's list where one of my great-grandfather's brothers went back and picked up another brother and then brought him back to the United States. And in that case, that ship's record then indicates where the brother was from, and then where in Germany, and where the brother that went over there is from in the United States. So I got a lot of great information from that ship's record. Be aware that you might find ship's records for your ancestors going back and forth to Germany, picking up relatives or visiting with relatives. If you want to learn more about finding passenger lists, the Family Search Wiki has a page for German immigration records, which goes into a lot of detail about the types of records you're going to find. There's also a webpage called the Immigration and Ships Passenger List Research Guide. Now, this is a really good research guide, but it's from 2011 and it hasn't been updated recently. So many of the links that are on the page are not valid. It's still talking about microfilm and who has the microfilm as opposed to who has the digitized images. But the outline that they lay out in there and the research process that they lay out on the webpage is a very good method to follow when you're doing your research. And Cindy's List. And some of us who have been researching for a long time probably use Cindy's List back, when we first started, but have forgotten about it over time. Well, Cindy's List is still very active in tracking information and compiling it. So on Cindy's List, there's a collection of links to ship and passenger lists that could be very helpful in finding the information you're looking for. Now, when you're looking at your German ancestors, think about what port they may have come into. So, in many cases, they came into New York through Castle Garden or for Ellis Island. But in other cases, they may have come in through another port. So ports like Galveston, Texas was a large entry port for Germans. New Orleans, a lot of them would come through New Orleans, get on the paddle boats and go up to St. Louis or Cincinnati or some of the other towns on the Missouri or Ohio River or the Mississippi River. And so those towns were being settled by the Germans, coming up through New Orleans. One of my family lines traveled up New Orleans. Two of the brothers ended up in St. Louis, and then the other brother ended up in Cincinnati. And then there are other records such as county and local histories. Now, if your ancestors settled in the New England states, Pennsylvania, Maryland, North Carolina, and that, on the Atlantic seaboard, prior to the 1850s, you may want to look at some of these early county histories that are out there because they may have biographical information. Moving further west, into Ohio, that 1850s sort of influx of pioneers into the Midwest, those county histories will include those individuals that settled in those areas. And so you'll be able to find these bibliographies within these county histories, and you may be able to find people who settled in the same location, the same town. And many of those people may have come from the same areas in Germany and then came to the US together and settled together. So here's an example of August Wise. And now this is my great-grandfather August Wise, not my great-great-grandfather August or my great-great-great-grandfather August Wise. You can see here August Wise is a well-known businessman in Shelby County, operates a sawmill, deals with hardwood lumber in Fort Laramie, and he was born and reared in this section and is a son of August and Teresa Wise. And it says here that August was born in Holland and Teresa was born in Germany. If you remember, the census record had August being born in Germany, not Holland. Another talk, I do a whole presentation on your German ancestors from Holland, basically. There were a lot of Germans that migrated to Holland, had families there, and then came to the US. But where are you going to find these local county histories? Well, if you look at Google Books, they have great collections of county histories there. Hathi Trust is a large digital library that has many of these county histories, and then the Internet Archive. So I would look at these three websites here and put in the county and the state and put, histories. In this case here, I was putting Shelby County, Ohio history and pulling that information up. And these biographies give you a great amount of information about your ancestors. If they're in these biographies, there may be pages about them. There may be photos of them or drawings of them. And in many of these, they will diagram out the towns or the street views. So, you get your 1800s Google Street View with all of the houses labeled along the streets. So they're interesting subjects to research.